So my name's Costas, founder and operator of Fortress Commercial Real Estate, locally here, about 4 years old as a company, startup entrepreneur as well. So I love speaking to other startups. I've been in commercial real estate 16 years, 13 here in Tampa Bay. Worked for the big shops, some of the biggest in the world, and did a lot of corporate real estate for some of the larger names that you would recognize as household names, e-commerce giants, everything. And through those experiences, I gained a lot of knowledge from how corporations run their real estate and manage it and underwrite it. So my goal is to basically share that knowledge with startups as they start their ventures so that they know what to look out for as they grow and how to negotiate and budget the appropriate time for your commercial real estate needs, because it becomes a pretty big deal as you grow and staff people and you need a facility and depending on what you're doing. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get to the presentation. Application. Okay. Is that visible? Yes, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see if it scrolls through. Yeah, great. Okay, scrolls through and everything. All right, so the agenda. Basically, I will just let you know that this is strictly a presentation on the search and negotiation process for leasing commercial real estate space. We will not talk about investing. We will not talk about owning. I will not talk about buying. I will mention lease versus purchase at a certain point in this presentation to explain to you why, as a startup, I recommend leasing versus purchase. Now, I will caveat that with, if this isn't your first startup and you're a novice entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur who has done this many a times, you might be able to bankroll a purchase. But for a true startup, I believe that leasing is the best option until you know what your cash position is and how big your company is going to be for a good amount of time, because it's a lot less risky to lease than to buy, and I'll explain why. So just to frame that, this is just leasing and how to go through that process. So we'll talk about searching, setting the parameters, the proposal stage, which is a non-binding document to basically set out your terms. You've heard all a term sheet. That's what I'll relate it to. And then from there, you'll go to the contract. So there's two different documents. There's a proposal document, and then there's the contract. The contract is the lease, and that is an obligation that you are bound to by legal matters. So at that point, you have to take that review a little bit more seriously and potentially involve attorneys. So there's two stages to proposal and lease. After that, we'll talk about things to consider in planning, which could be potentially just a recap and a lease versus buy. And I'll finish off with some acronyms and terminology and vendors. So if you have any questions, you can post them. You can put them in Q&A. I can deal with them as they come up, or we can save them to the end. We'll figure that out as we go. All right, so searching. You've all heard it, location, location, location. It's important in real estate, but it depends on your business model and what you're trying to do. And location could affect the type of property and the cost. So really knowing where you want to be helps you limit your options so that you can focus on making a decision, because that's the point, to find a space, not to look at everything in the market and confuse yourself. So where do you want to be? Why do you want to be there? Do you need frontage exposure on the main road, or can you be in the back somewhere because people will find you from marketing? Do you need to be near your key employees and where they live, or do you need to be near your customers, or do you just need to be near a highway so that you can get wherever you need to go? These are all things that you want to think about and use them to refine your search, whether you're searching alone or with an advisor or a broker. Do you need a sign or do you not need a sign? Do you need parking? And be careful, because sometimes you have to pay for parking if you're downtown, but other places in the suburbs, parking's free, or maybe on the side of the road, it's hourly. So all these things you want to take into account because they're going to affect your budget. Quality, type, and fit. What type of space do you need? Is it an office? Are you programmers or software development? Or are you making something? Or, do you need an assembly facility or manufacturing? Do you need heavy power? Are you a law firm? Do you just need space for clients to come in and meet in large conference rooms? Do you need a garden style office or a high rise? Do you need a warehouse or a restaurant? Think about this, because each of those property types has different components, different parking ratios. You might like the look of an industrial building because it's cool and it's edgy, but it doesn't have a very high parking ratio. So if you've got 20 people, you might not be able to park them at an industrial facility. You can see this when you go to Publix. There's a huge parking lot where you will have an abundance of parking. But if you go to a warehouse, there's not as much parking. Those parking ratios are set by the city. So you got to understand, if you've got a lot of employees, you got to be in the right building with the right parking and the right HVAC loads, or else it's going to cause you problems. So how much space do you need? As a startup, sometimes it's hard to tell. If you've got a piece of equipment or machinery that you're working with, obviously you can measure those dimensions and you know that at least you need that much space. If you've got 5, 10, 15 people, you can easily do some calculations, work backwards, and either figure out how much space you need due to parking or due to the size of the offices or the bullpen. So you might take a little bit of work on the front end to figure out how much you need. It's probably not going to be too much, but again, it depends on your model. But knowing that number will help you in your search parameters, and it also help you compare different locations based on price. How many employees and clients will you have showing up on a day-to-day basis? That's going to help you with your parking, whether you need covered parking or street parking or anything else, or if you have to pay per employee or per client. So keep that in mind. And then, do you know the layout for your operations? That's going to help you, because if you go to a space that needs a build out, you're going to have to describe that build out to a contractor or a landlord so that they can price it out and construct it and give you a time frame of when it'll be ready. If you walk into a space and it works perfectly and you can run your operations, then we call that as is, and that'll save you time and money, and it'll help you in the negotiations. So you really want to know how your business flows through a facility, because it could cost you time and money. If you have to completely demolish interior and rebuild, that could take you 4 to 5 months after you've signed the lease. So, you're looking at some time to get this done. So you want to budget for that. And we'll talk about the time as we move through this. Term length. How long of a lease do you want to sign? Do you know that you're going to be a specific size for the next 3 to 5 years? Or do you think you're going to grow at a feverish pace over the next year to 2, which means you're either going to have to take a space bigger than you need to grow into, or you're going to need to take a space that has an adjacent unit that you can expand into and get rights on, or you're going to have to take the space that's there on a short-term basis, maybe a year, until you're ready to grow again, and then you find another location. Plenty of aspects to this, but what I find with startups is they don't know what size they're going to be in a year, because they could hit some serious growth, which is a good thing, but it doesn't translate to a good thing when you talk to a landlord, because if a landlord's going to spend money on a unit, they want to amortize that as a return that they get over the life of the lease. So the only way it works on a short-term basis is if you take a space as is, which means you either have to work with what you're given or do it yourself. So keep that in mind. And, different story if you're going to grow in different locations and you're going to have 1, 2, 3 operations, say like a restaurant, then it doesn't matter. You'll be in the first location for a long period of time, even with growth. But if you're software development and you've got a team of 6, but you think you're going to be a team of 24 in 12 months, well, a 6-person office and a 24-person office look very different, and they cost very different. So really think through how long you need to be in a space, and don't sign yourself away for not being able to manage that facility. This is also going to play into when you buy versus lease. At some point, when you know you're going to be a certain size for 5 to 10 years, then I think it's reasonable to consider purchasing something. But until then, please consider leasing. Pricing. What's your budget? Do you have your funding lined up for this operation? Or is it contract based on your clients? Or are you looking for investors? A landlord is going to ask you all these questions, because if you're a true startup and you haven't done this, you have no financials or working history to show them what you've done. If you're a startup and you've been doing this from your house for 2 to 3 years out of your garage, now you just want to go out and get a physical facility, different story. You have 2 years of operating financials to show them, and then they just have to account for, well, now we're putting in a rent expense. So make sure you know where your funding's coming from and how you're structured, because a landlord will ask for your financials, whether it's company financials or personal financials. So be ready to share that. Don't feel like they're asking too much, and don't be embarrassed. It's a normal part of the process, and they ask everybody for financials because that space is their investment, and they need to know what they're getting as a return, and that they can be sure that the company they're signing a lease with is going to stay in that facility for the appropriate amount of time that they budgeted for their investment. So it's normal. That's all I'm trying to say. If you're working with a broker or an advisor, make sure you share that budget with them and be honest. That way it'll help limit the options, and you can use it in your negotiations strategically, so you don't paint yourself in a corner, or you give yourself some room to float within your budget. And make sure you're only looking at the appropriate options. So you've got your budget, your location, you've found some options. Now you're going to go tour some space. I recommend taking a half day or a full day to do this, whether you have 3, 4, or maybe 7 or 8 options to look at. Just block it off, go spend the entire morning and look at them each successively. It'll help you keep everything organized. It'll help you create a matrix of the locations, the prices, the sizes. And if you run them simultaneously, if you get down the road in 2 weeks with one of them and for some reason it gets leased, you've got another one that you've already looked at and have been pricing, so you have multiple proposals. It's a very smart way to do it, so you're not wasting your time. And at the end of the day, if you're running 3 proposals and one of them works out and you go to lease, you can tell the other 2, I'm sorry, they understand. It's part of the business. So the timeline for this could be 1 to 6 months. I'll be honest with you. I mean, it just depends on market availability, what you like, and what's out there at that time. I've searched for space for people that it's taken a year to 2 years before the right property showed up. So you want to put some time into this. You can't always say that that what's out there is going to fit your needs. So again, when I get the time frame, I want everybody to understand time is a luxury, and I understand that some startups don't have it. Just understand that you might get pigeonholed into a space that's not ideal because you didn't wait for the right time. So maybe the next go around, you budget the right time in. So that's the searching. Now we're going to go to the proposal. You've narrowed the search results down. You probably picked 2 or 3 that you like. Now you want to issue either an RFP or an LOI. And those are basically the same document. One's a request for proposal. The other's a letter of intent. All it really means is who put down the number first, right? Request for proposal, you're stating, here's what I want. What are you going to charge me? A letter of intent is, here's what I want done, and here's what I'm willing to pay. And then that's where the negotiations start. So it's just the beginning of the staring contest. You can do whichever one you want. Document all your needs and all your modifications to any floor plan as best that you can. If you have a broker and advisor, please lean on them, because they have these templates and it takes 5 minutes versus you recreating the wheel. And then you can have somebody manage the process for you. Include everything that you want in the RFP process. Put it in black and white on paper. Don't trust on what somebody said while you're walking through saying, yeah, don't worry about it. We'll fix that light. Nope. They will say yes to everything you say as you're walking through that space. That's their job. They're salespeople. Make sure when you get the proposal, you document everything you talked about so that there's no questions. When you get that lease in that space, everything you wanted was done and somebody's been held accountable to it. So make sure it's in black and white on that paper. Keep your proposals organized. I use spreadsheets with Matrix. Ebony, thank you for pointing that out. Because then you can look at everything. If there's a different size to 2 different units and 2 different rates, you might figure out that the larger unit is a better price per month or per square foot. And you're like, well, maybe I'll stretch and I'll get the larger space. So it keeps you organized. And then once you're down to the right business terms that you like, be prepared to say, yes, let's move on. Again, a proposal is non-binding. Nothing that you sign on a proposal will bind you to taking that space. You're just setting out the business terms. So don't be afraid to say, yes, I agree to that. I'll sign this proposal. All that does, and make sure it's just a proposal, is moves you to get to the lease draft. And now the lease is going to take a little bit of time because an attorney has to draft it, and then you're going to review it. So when you come to terms, you're ready to go to lease. Again, the timeline to a proposal could be 2 weeks to over a month. And the reason is you've got your side, you got the landlord's broker, maybe your broker, you got an attorney on the landlord side, you probably have a contractor bidding the work, you got an insurance agent reviewing everything. All those people have different schedules, different vacations, weekends, kids, holidays. Things come up and things just sit on people's desks. It takes longer than you think. So that timeline while you're sitting on a proposal could be back and forth for a month. Just keep that in mind. You can try and push people, but sometimes it just is what it is. Okay, so we got the proposal. That's done. Now we're going to the lease. And at this point, you've been given a legal document from an attorney that the landlord has engaged. You will review the lease on your own so you're comfortable with it. Your broker, if you have one, will review the lease to make sure any market standard stuff is not included or is included, and also to make sure all the numbers from the proposal made it over without any typos or sleight of hand. Just, it's good to have multiple eyes on it that have been part of the proposal. Your attorney is going to review it, and I strongly recommend a real estate attorney. Don't just use your brother-in-law who does personal injury, because real estate law is a different skill set and the clauses are different. So you want to make sure you have somebody that knows real estate law looking at this lease. You can have your brother who's a personal injury recommend somebody, but make sure they're specializing in real estate or contract law. Once your attorney reviews it, you should also have an insurance agent review it, because in that lease, it will state what type of insurance coverage you need. And if you don't already have those existing coverages, you either need to change your policy or ask your insurance provider to tell you what policies you have to see if you can ask the landlord to change the language in the lease. It is possible. It just takes a little bit of grinding back and forth. Rule 1 with any lease is anything can be negotiated and changed. You do not have to take the lease as it's written. If there's something in there you don't like or doesn't fit your business, you can ask for it to be changed. I can't promise you it'll be changed, but that's where the negotiation starts, and you see how well you can get along with the other party if they're reasonable to massage the wording to something that fits for both of you. If they're not reasonable and there's a problem where they're not going to change something and you feel strongly about it, you might want to reconsider that lease or that location, because you are going to be a partner with that landlord for 1, 3, or 5 years. If they can't be reasonable at this point in time and help you out on something, what happens when the plumbing breaks or a hurricane hits. So just keep that in mind. Once all that's been reviewed by the attorney, you're going to want to look at it again with your broker and then respond to the landlord. They are then going to review it on their side and do the same thing. Red lines will be sent back. You'll be reviewing a document in red line. You definitely want to get on a phone call at some point if there are onerous changes that need to be made, and just hammer them out. Just talk through them. Usually you can come to an agreement on the changes, and then once that's done, you get a final clean draft, and that's what you sign and execute. Again, it could take 1 to 2 months for the same reason, and because this is a much more important document. It's a legal document, and you've got attorneys, insurance agents, brokers, landlords, contractors, again, all their own schedules, kids, summer, vacations, holidays, whatever the case might be. Things just sit on people's desks. So budget in some time for this. All right, so we've chatted about the process. Now I'll go through a little bit of the planning considerations. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I'll keep going. So lease versus buy. Why do I focus on leasing for startups? It's because of preservation of capital. As a startup, cash is very important to you. Again, if you're a serial entrepreneur and you've done this and you've got a treasure chest of reserves, stop listening. You can buy if you want to. But if you're strapped for cash, it is much less costly to lease than to buy. When you lease, you put down the escrow, you put down the security deposit, and you start paying rent. And if you need something done to the space, you ask the landlord to finance it into the lease. If you buy, you put a much larger down payment with the bank, maybe 10 to 15 to 25%. And if there's anything that needs to be fixed, you need to fix that and pay for it yourself. So it's going to cost you a lot, and it's going to drain your cash from where it needs to be, which is in your business working for you until you get to the right size. So in my opinion, your capital is better served in your business on your widget. Buying is also, you now have an asset that is not a liquid asset. They are not easy to sell, and they're not quick. They're not like homes. They don't sell in 30 to 40 days. Commercial real estate could take 60, 90, 120 days. So if you make the wrong decision, wrong location, wrong size, you're not going to get rid of that property quickly. And now you're going to have to manage a second facility because your business is still growing, and you have a property that you're not using anymore, or you're managing and straddling two properties. So again, unless you know how big you're going to be for a reasonable amount of time, 5 to 10 years, to where if you do grow in 5 years, it's okay because you use that building, you paid it down. It's a lot easier to sell at a discount, or you can profit on it or keep it as an investment. I really think you should be leasing as a startup. Plus, leasing in a multi-tenant building can allow you to expand if there's units on either side of you. If you buy a building, that's the size you got, right? Unless you want to expand the building, which again costs more. So how long does it take to prepare? We talked about this, at least 3 to 5 months before you need to move in. I like working with 8 to 10 months because of everything that I spoke to you about, and using time to your benefit as a negotiating strategy so that you don't feel stressed out that somebody knows I need to be in 2 weeks. Well, take it or leave it. This is the price. So how to use a broker to your advantage or an advisor to your advantage. Takes the work off your plate, lets you focus on your business is what you do best. And like I just said, this is a 3 to 5 month project. So unless you want to take on another day job while you're running your business, it's probably good to hire a project manager. And by hire, I mean brokers. You do not have to pay a broker that works on your behalf. They are paid by the landlord or the seller. Similar to when you buy a home, the seller has a fee built into their sale for the buyer's broker. Well, a tenant's broker is paid by the landlord. So you get the benefit of having somebody on your behalf, looking over things, making sure you're getting the right deal, managing the paperwork, drafting all the documents, coordinating all the negotiations and the vendors, who knows what they're doing and is willing to manage this project. You just make the decisions weekly or whenever you meet to look at properties. So you do you on your business and let the broker handle the real estate. Terminology. I went through some of these as we were talking, so I'll try and go back through. RFP, request for proposal, LOI, letter of intent. SF is square footage. That's the size of the space that you're looking at. The rent, when you figure out your rent, whatever number they're marketing, let's say it's $10 and you're in 1,000 square feet, 10 times 1,000 is 10,000 per year. You divide by 12 to get your monthly number. If you see a rate quoted as triple net, NNN, if it's $10 triple net, you want to ask what the operating expenses are on top of that, because you'll have to add those two together. If it's $3 in OpEx, the total is $13 gross. If you see a space being marketed as gross per square foot, then you know all the expenses are wrapped in. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of people will throw out a number and it says triple net. You think everything's included, and then you find out, oh God, I got to pay another 30% more. So make sure you ask which one it is. And then on top of that, you always have to pay sales tax. Utilities, internet, phone, cable, that's on you as a tenant. So make sure you understand what that might cost you. TI is tenant improvements. That's the construction that you might need done to the space. So they'll call that a TI. They might give you an allowance, or they might handle all the TI for you. CAM is common area expenses, or common area maintenance. It is part of the operating expenses, but it's not all of it. CAM, real estate taxes, and the building insurance all make up operating expenses. CAM on its own is just the common areas, the parking lot, the elevators, anything that you're sharing with other tenants. Let's see. BOV is a broker's opinion of value. It's kind of like an appraisal, but it's not a certified appraisal, so you can't use it with a bank. But if you want a comfort level of what property might be worth, you can ask your broker. They've got the same tools to figure it out as an appraiser. You just can't use it for a purchase loan. So personal guarantee. It will come up as a startup. I do not recommend personal guarantees, but as a startup, if you have no financial history, you're probably going to have to sign a personal guarantee because you've never done this before and the landlord doesn't have an existing business to look at. If you've been in business for 3 to 5 years, but you've been working from home, different story. Now your first time taking on some space, you probably can fight on the personal guarantee because you have some operating history to show for a business that's been around 3 to 5 years. So keep that in mind. If it's a small space, personal guarantee should be nominal because you've already budgeted for this as an investment in the business you want to start. If it's a large space, different story. If you're spending a couple $100,000 a year on a space and you sign personally, if something goes wrong, you're paying that. That's a personal guarantee. So be very mindful of that personal guarantee and try your best not to include it, but chances are as a startup, you're going to have to. So be very careful. See if you can burn off that personal guarantee over a couple of years as you prove that you're meeting your financial hurdles. So just keep that in mind. If anything, if you can keep that as the last thing to negotiate, at least then you know what everything else looks like. And you can say, yeah, I'm comfortable signing on that personally. That's it. We will go through other vendors that are needed if you can read that. Lenders, attorneys, insurance agents, movers, furniture sales, IT wiring and cabling, telecom, electricians, contractors, bartenders, therapists, all of these people you will need in a real estate search because at some point in time you will need their services. You can usually ask your broker for some recommendations on vendors, or if you've got people in your network that are lenders or attorneys or insurance providers, you will probably tap into them to ask them questions about your lease. Point to be made here, when you take over a space, you will be given electric at every outlet and it better work. And you can tell your landlord if it doesn't to fix it. You might be given data outlets, but you are not guaranteed that the data has to work because every tenant is different. Somebody wants fiber, cable, Ethernet, whatever, Cat 5, Cat 6. The landlord can't guess. So you make sure that you include that in your request for specifications when you're doing your improvements, or else that cost is on you because you're putting something special in there. So don't think that just because there's a data outlet in a wall that there's a wire behind it, because sometimes people snip them. So anyways, that is the extent of the presentation. There's my contact info if anybody ever needs follow-up questions, whatever the case might be. If you're searching for space and need somebody to help you, I'm open to anything, and I love connecting via LinkedIn or any social media if you have questions. I give this presentation every month in Ebor, and I always put this out there. Feel free to ask me any question. So I don't know if there's somewhere I need to be looking for.
Kostas, so look,
I can stop.
There's questions in the Q&A there. I don't know if you have a minute to tackle those.
Q&A. There we go. Perfect. Is it harder to lease space because of COVID? It depends on what industry and asset class you're in. If you're in industrial, COVID has not negatively affected that space, so you're not going to get many discounts on warehouse. It's actually, we've seen a surge in demand for industrial warehouse because of e-commerce and the Amazon effect. Retail, it could be easier because a lot of restaurants and other concepts have unfortunately had issues. And then office, it's either or, to be honest with you. Some businesses have been doing good and expanding if you're in tech. Others, have figured out that working from home works for them, and they're going to try and get rid of their leases. So it just depends. It's too hard to say, and it's too soon to tell. I know you see a lot of media headlines that say that this has devastated the office world and everyone's working from home and there's going to be a glut of inventory. The reality is there's other companies that are growing and hiring and are possibly going to take the excess space. And also another part of it is office leases are long-term leases. So this pandemic, although hurtful, has only been around for 8 months. If you had a 7-year lease, you can't just get out of it. So you got to figure out a way around it for the next 6 years until you can figure out, what you do at the end of the lease. And in 7 years, we might not be talking about COVID. It could be just a normal occurrence. So it is affecting the industry, but it's not widespread and it's very case by case, which is another reason that I recommend you speak with a broker who's been in the market for years that can tell you the nuances of how it's affecting certain areas and certain asset classes. Are landlords asking for more or less of a renter in terms of the monthly lease amount because of COVID? I think we can parlay that from the answer before. It depends on the asset class. If the landlord's hurting and desperate to fill a space, then you can probably get it at a better deal. If they're not, they don't care. We're in Tampa. The market is very strong, a lot of demand. Everybody wants to be here. A landlord could potentially wait at peak pricing and not care that you're bringing up COVID. It is what it is. It has not affected everybody the same way across the board. Is it common for landlords to have you pay for the improvements over a period of time with each month's payment, or would they just add to the back of the lease? Kind of both. A landlord usually budgets in a certain amount of dollars. Let's say it's $50,000 at that rate that they're marketing, and they're fine within a little bit of margin error to spend that. If your improvements take $100,000, well, now they might take that other $50,000 and increase your rate by $1 or $2, whatever the calculation works out to amortize it over the life of the lease. And then basically you're paying for it in your rent. They're not going to add it to the back of the lease. It's going to be, your rate is just going to increase a little bit if they give that to you as an allowance. Do you have any recommendations for contractors to build out undeveloped land? Any idea of price per square foot to build for a medical office type of space? Very loaded question. Not an easy answer. So many variables. Even if you talk to a contractor, and I'm not a contractor, they won't give you that answer just off of basic question. You really got to talk about the details. Is it a dental practice? Is it a surgery center? Is it a chiropractic? All those have different utilities. Is it 2-story? Is it single story? It depends on the fit and finish. I do have recommendations for contractors. I'd be happy to share those with you if you want to reach out to my contact info. But land development is one of the hardest, most time-consuming, complex, and costly processes. You do not want to go at it alone. It's even more mind-numbing than residential home building, and there's a lot of governmental steps. So I highly recommend talking to a contractor that specializes in medical construction so that you can get a better idea. I'm going to tell you it's probably $200 to $300 a square foot, and that's a big range, I know, and that's just from deals that I've done on some dental practices, and we've ranged that. It really depends on what you're given to start with. Do you have to clear the land, or is it already cleared? Are there trees? Do you have to build a retention? Is it zoned appropriately? If it's not zoned appropriately, then you have to spend money to rezone it. There's a risk that you might not get it rezoned. There's a lot of variables. So please follow up with me if you really want a contractor, and I'll connect you with somebody that can help you. Fred Lay with CSI is a great contractor that's done special builds like that for lab space and clean space for medical builds. So you can call him, you can call me, and I can move that along. So